Good morning, everyone. It's morning still here on the West Coast. Today is June 8th, and our topic for today is inventory management. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how you can do that a little bit better in your organization. This is one of a series of Dynamic Dialog webinars. We do them the second and the fourth Tuesday of the month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. We have a variety of topics and a lot of different items to cover. Today, we're going to talk about inventory management. We do a short presentation and then we open it for questions or comments or whatever. The link that you use today is good through the end of this month. For the next quarter, it will change, but you will still receive those the day of if you don't subscribe. And if you have subscribed, your subscription will transfer over to the new one. So we'll do that for you. So welcome today. And again, we're just going to dive into inventory. Holding inventory. When we talk about inventory, we talk about things that we're holding, amounts of goods that we're holding. And there's a lot of reasons that companies do this. One reason is because they want to be able to immediately satisfy demand. That's for their customers in a finished goods form. It might be to have raw material on hand so that you can immediately make anything that your customers need or want, or be able to change your own production schedule immediately. But it's always about an immediate need to have something on hand that you can either transform or deliver. Companies hold inventory to manage variability in customer demand. They look at the different kinds of quantities, minimum quantities, min-max models, safety stock models. There's a lot of different things for that. There's a lot of different kinds of inventory, and I don't have a slide on that, but the different types of inventory include raw materials, work in process, finished goods material, in transit material, warehouse and storage at warehouse and distribution centers, and things like that. So there's a variety of different inventories that companies have. Then we have a lot of things like tools and MRO inventory, which is maintenance and repair inventory. There's all kinds of different tools, and some companies break that down into supplies and tools. Some companies put all that into MRO. You can do it any way that it works for your company. Just know which buckets you're dealing with. And you can hold any of these and all of these kinds of inventory for all of these and any of these reasons. We have oftentimes a variability in supplier deliveries. Oftentimes, especially when you're shipping things by boat over from Asia, for example, then there's uncertainty in exactly when it will arrive. It might arrive on time to get to the dock, but it may not get unloaded in the time that you would like. There may be some holdup at customs. So oftentimes when companies are dealing with suppliers overseas, especially in Asia, then they hold other inventory just in case, because maybe the delivery you can't count on it. Sometimes you have domestic suppliers that you can't count on their deliveries, and so you also do that. But that's a problem that should be able to be resolved, because that should be more predictable within a few days. Here in the United States, we're coming into hurricane season. We have hurricanes at different times of the year. We have snowstorms. So depending on where you are, your company's located, and your supplier is located, it may be affected by a number of things. Inventory is also used as a hedge for lead times that are unstable, for things that are going on, like maybe the pandemic. And right now, companies have increased the amount of inventory they like to have because of repercussions from the pandemic, in increased lead times, in longer transport times, in uncertainty with getting product from their suppliers. And also because when they can buy at prices that they like to buy more. So therefore, they're going to hold more because they can buy it at a lower price than if they have to wait. Right now, for example, metal prices are all over the place, but they're up more than they're down. So if you could get a metal price that you liked, you might actually increase your order and then hold that inventory for some time, because you think that the price is going to go up or is going to remain pretty volatile for a while, and at least you can lock that in. That also can lead to other problems that we'll look at, but that is one reason that companies hold inventory as a hedge against things like that. You also hold things like warranty, spare parts, extra parts for service requirements, for warranty work, for repairs, for anything that you may need to do to support products that you've already sold or that you are in the process of selling. Oftentimes you get a better price when you buy more, so there's an economy of scale that applies, and companies buy more because they want that economy of scale. They also buy more because there are minimum buys from some suppliers. And so if you need 90 of something, their minimum buy is 100, you're going to buy 100. So you might hold those extra few pieces of inventory because you needed to buy up to their minimum purchase requirement to get the reasonable price. Oftentimes, if there's a minimum requirement of, say, 100, companies will sell you fewer parts, but they will sell them at an increased rate because they have to do extra handling on that. So if you want something that's close, maybe 80 or 90, and the parts aren't especially expensive, it makes sense to buy the minimum buy. If you only need 1 or 2, then maybe buying those extra 98 may not make sense for your company. Each situation has to be evaluated, and you need to figure out what works best for you and your company. And then there are the lifetime or the last time buys. Especially in electronics, parts go out of the variations change. They have more variations. They get upgraded. They go obsolete, end of life. So the supplier will often call up and say, we're going to discontinue this part. It's going to be replaced by another part. But if you'd like to buy if you'd like to place a last time buy, the last time that we're taking orders for this is in the next 3 months. So give us the order that you want. And in some cases, companies will go and estimate what they think their lifetime purchase is, and they will buy enough to cover anything they have. If they think that the substitute, or they can get a prototype or a sample of the new product and verify that it's going to work fine in their product, then they may not need to do that. This is often a practice that we see in the medical industry, any kind of medical devices, and also with defense materials. They err on the side of caution and do the last time buys and buy as many as they can. And they also start looking at brokers to see what's available that they might be able to buy. With electronic parts, now more than ever, we have issues with counterfeit potentials. And so you have to be very careful about that. But if you can do that, and that makes sense for your company, then that's a good thing to do. And you want to be able to do that as frequently as it makes sense for you and for your company. So there's a lot of reasons to hold inventory. And we talked about the various kinds of inventory. So most companies set their inventory policies, and the policies tell the members of the supply chain organization, this is how much you want to have. No more than this and no less than this. And that may be specifically stated, like a min-max policy that has actual numbers on it, or it may be a number that's, it may not be a number. It may be a reference to the policy, depending on the recent volume, depending on the customer's forecast, depending on the mix of products, depending on any number of things. So you want to consider your customer demand and how volatile it is. If it's pretty stable, then that's a very good situation. If your customer demand is volatile, then you need to have more flexibility in your inventory, in the inventory you're holding for those customers. If you have a variety of mix, maybe small, medium, and large sizes of things, then your product may have a fairly stable forecast, but the mix within that can change, and it can change for a variety of reasons. So you need to know your customers, and you need to know the volatility amongst the mix of your parts as well. And then you want to look at customer patterns. Do they have certain times that they buy more? Maybe they buy more of something in the summer than they do in the winter, maybe vice versa. Maybe they have patterns that revolve around school schedules, so that during, for instance, lunch items, peanut butter for children, they may buy more when school is in session, and then once school is out in the summer, they don't buy so much. So look for patterns, look for trends, look for the seasonality that you know is in your customer's forecast and should be therefore in your forecast to your company and to your suppliers. You want to look at the lead times, both the length and the stability. Many parts had very short lead times, and once the pandemic hit, or once as it hit, those lead times changed a lot. So are they stable? Maybe they've lengthened. Most or many lead times have changed. They've increased. And if they're stable, then that's a good thing. If they're not, then you want to include that in your inventory policy, because you want to be able to make sure you don't run out. Assurance of supply is always paramount in any supply chain organization. You want to make sure that you can satisfy your customers' needs and keep that nice flow of material going through your factory, through your production area, so that you have production, you have parts coming in, production ongoing, and you can continue to satisfy your customer needs. The product and volume mix is a very important consideration in how you determine your inventory policy. Your planning horizon. If you have short lead times that from things that are mostly catalog items and things that are readily available, then that's a very nice situation to be in. But many companies don't have that, or they have that for a number of parts, but then they have critical parts that are make to order and custom made for that particular product that you're producing and selling to your customers. So how far are we looking out? Are we looking out in the next couple of weeks or couple of months, which you should be at least looking out about 3 months, or are you looking past that? And again, I said defense and medical devices always have longer outlooks and longer planning horizon just because of the nature of what they're doing. Their contracts are longer, they have longer lives to support on their products, and they need to give their customers more warning of changes to incorporate obsolescence or any just sometimes what you might consider simple modifications need to be approved by suppliers. So, I mean, by customers. So you want to make sure your planning horizon is adjusted to fit your customers and your suppliers. Cost is another one, and there's many costs that go into inventory. The cost of acquisition is one cost. That is what you pay for that product. That can include your ordering cost. That can include the transportation cost. But generally, acquisition cost is the price of the good that you're buying and the transportation to get it from the supplier into your inventory. That may not be an addition if your supplier is paying the transportation and has built that into that cost. But if your company is paying inbound freight, then the acquisition cost does include that. Should be included, should include the transportation. And it also includes taxes and things like that. Then there's holding cost. Holding costs are what it costs you to actually hold inventory. If you think about a balance sheet and you think about the area, if you've ever taken accounting, there are current assets and long-term assets. Current assets, the prominent items in current assets are inventory and cash. And believe me, the finance people always prefer cash. The production people, the operations people really like to have a lot of inventory, but there's always that fight or that weighing how much is too much. So the holding cost is what it takes you to hold that inventory. So there is a cost of money involved in that, because if you aren't carrying the inventory, then you typically have cash and you could do lots of other things with that cash, like invest it. And so what return you could get on that goes into the calculation of the holding cost. It also includes things like managing that inventory. So it could be warehouse workers, warehouse space, the allocated costs for that. That would include mortgage or rent, utilities. It includes security. It includes insurance that you have to hold the inventory. So there's any number of items that go into that to create that holding cost. The holding cost is generally applied as a percentage. So you have the acquisition cost, maybe it cost you $100 to buy that item. And if your holding cost is going to be, it's in a percentage, so it might be say 23%. So the holding cost on that $100 item is going to be $23. Now, it's not often that supply chain people look at that in that kind of detail, but financial people do. And you should be thinking in those terms as to what it costs us to hold that inventory. So again, it includes a variety of items that may be in your organization. And then they are, I say they're allocated or peanut buttered across the items in inventory on a percentage basis. Ordering costs are usually quoted in terms of what does it cost us to place an order. That includes the buyer's time and any other equipment that the buyer might need. So it might mean some computers or some office machines that support that, maybe some cost for your MRP or ERP system. It includes the cost of issuing the order, managing the order, and then processing the invoice as well. So if you have, it might cost you $125 for every order you place. You can calculate that by looking at what your total cost for ordering, again, your buyers, your accounts payable for your suppliers, any other costs that you have, and then divide that, take that for the last year, maybe for 2020, and then divide that by the number of orders that you issued. So you look at how many purchase orders you issued, and those were your cost, and that gives you the cost per order. So that is often referred to as a fixed cost, but it is a cost per order issued. Some companies look at it per order received. It can kind of be either way. And they also, it will vary from year to year if you're placing more orders or not. So the more orders you place, the more costly that is. And this is an area where it often gets confusing in companies when their rates, their volumes reduce. So for example, your company may have been doing 1,000 a month of making 1,000 a month. So with the pandemic hit, your market got a little soft, things got a little slow. Maybe you went down to 800 per month. So oftentimes they look at that and they say, okay, we reduced our revenue because we're only producing now 800 a month and selling 800 a month instead of 1,000 a month. So our revenue is reduced. We need to reduce our cost. So we need to reduce the number of people that you have in ordering. And it costs as much to place the order because it's not a factor of how many zeros are on the order. It's a factor of how many orders you're placing. So just by reducing the volume really doesn't reduce the work in the purchasing organization because you're still issuing the same number of orders. Unless you reduce you change your product mix, unless you change your ordering policies, you're still going to be placing order. It may just be for a different quantity. And this is something that a lot of companies really have a hard time grasping because they say, oh, everybody's cutting, we need to cut procurement as well. And if you cut the procurement heads, then they say, why can't you do the work? We're not buying as much. And we're not buying as much volume, but we're still placing as many orders. And that's where the work and managing as many suppliers, and that's where the work really comes to the purchasing organization. And then, of course, there's costs of warehouse and storage space. And those costs are in addition to any kind of in-house inventory you have. If you have external warehouses, if you have to rent extra space, if you have distribution centers, any of that, those are also costs to manage inventory. So there's a variety of those, and you have to look at what's driving your company to say which costs are the most important. And then also you have to look at your customer's expected service level. So is your product something that the customer doesn't mind buying on a back order basis, or they place an order and then expect to wait a little bit of time for that? Or is it something that they expect to call up or go on email and order it and receive it within, say, 2 days, a la the Amazon model that we're all very used to? We order it, it says it'll be here in 2 days, and that's a good thing. Or even a walk-up kind of thing. We walk up and get our product. So what is your customer's expected level of service? What have you trained them to be accepting from you? And is that going to change? So the higher the level of service for your customers, meaning if you want to have product that they want to buy 99% of the time in stock, you're going to have to hold more inventory. If they're okay with occasional backlogs or slight delays, or you quote them a lead time, which gives you time to respond. Maybe you quote them a 4-week lead time. So you don't have to have everything in stock the minute they order it, but you have to be able to produce the balance of that in that total order within that 4 weeks and get that to your customer. So many companies do that. They quote a lead time that's longer than they actually need to produce, because that way they can fulfill orders that are over and above their forecast levels. They're producing what they're producing, and they have that determined by their forecast. But if they do have spikes, they want to be able to address those within that kind of lead time. So they quote a customer a lead time that gives them a little bit of a cushion. And that is not a bad thing. That is a very smart way to run your business, because it allows you to be more flexible and still satisfy your customer requirements. So lots of reasons that drive your factory policy. So one other big factor is in inventory policies and setting inventory is, do you have a push, a pull, or a hybrid system? Push systems are different than pulls, and then there are hybrids, and many organizations have what we call a hybrid, and we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But a push system is a product that has a fairly stable demand, a medium to a long-term life. One of my favorite examples for this is paper towels. Paper towels are not something that's a very seasonal item. We use paper towels all the time. Either you use them or you don't. Some households have very few paper towels and they don't need them. They use other things. They use sponges, they use towels, they use things that they can keep using. Other households like paper towels and use them a lot more often. But whatever that is, in aggregate, you don't usually change that appreciably like over the course of the year. Sure, if you're doing a little more entertaining in the holidays, you might use a few more, but it's not going to be enough to create big spikes or seasonality. So that's a product that has a fairly stable demand, medium to long-term life. Paper towels don't change a lot. They do change how many you get on a roll, and they change the half sizes and the knot and the whole sheet sizes. They used to change them a lot by design. So they'd put flowers on them or this or that or the other. But then there were some environmental issues with the dye. So many companies don't do that anymore. They're just white paper towels, or maybe a kind of a cream color paper towel. So that's a fairly stable item. And that is a push system. When you make paper towels to your forecast, and you make them regardless of what's being ordered. Now, about a year ago, people were buying those up in extra quantities and they had to increase their production. But that was a little bit of an anomaly. And so that settled back down because paper towels was different than toilet paper. But they also changed the way they package it and things like that. But you still don't have a lot of that. And you're going to continue to make those, because there's nothing in any marketplace that tells you that all of a sudden people are not going to want paper towels anymore. It's not affected by technology. It's not affected by trends or fads. It's just a staple that everyone has. And so when you have this push system, you minimize your operating costs because you use large batch sizes. You have a stable production. And so you forecast that out, you set up, you run for long periods of time. You may shut down for maintenance, and then you set up again and run again. Typically, these kinds of parts and goods are high volume, fairly low mix. They may be long, complex supply chains, and they may be very short and simple, that you're making this and you're selling that. You don't have push systems typically that with anything that has a shelf life or a short shelf life. If it has a shelf life of, say, you might look at Campbell's soup. Campbell's soup has a shelf life, but it's a pretty long shelf life. So if you buy that can of tomato soup unless you're buying it by the case and not going through it, the risk of obsolescence to the customer is fairly low and water bottles are the same way. There is an expiration date, but it's usually several years into the future. And so the shelf life is really not an issue for that push system. You're buying things that are readily available inputs to that. Your inventory, your raw inventory and your finished goods inventory is fairly inexpensive to hold. If you think about paper towels, they don't cost a lot. They do take some space, but if you have a little bit extra, it's not going to break the bank to hold a few more of those for a little bit longer period of time. And they also are often associated with long, costly setup times. So I talked about things like Campbell's tomato soup, that is a staple, paper towels. It can also be things like toaster ovens or kind of kitchen appliances, like maybe a mixer that you're going to need, a blender that you want to sell, and you're going to make those because you know there's going to be a market for those. There may not be a huge market, but those products aren't changing a lot. And so the demand is going to be fairly stable. You're going to know what you sold last month, last quarter, last year, and you're going to be able to make a pretty good estimate of what you can sell in the future. So your production schedule is not going to be all over the place. You're going to have a pretty stable production line and a pretty stable volume that you're handling. And anything that you make and just push out into the marketplace, expecting it to be bought, is on that push system. Then the pull system is a little bit different. The pull system says we're not going to actually make anything until we get a signal from a customer that they're going to buy it. So this is where you have uncertainty in the demand, or the demand is a lot more volatile. It can be a simple supply chain, but it can be a little more complex, but that leads us toward the hybrid, which again, we'll cover in a bit. So pull scenarios are typically simple or preset, so it's easy to respond to that. For a pull system, a pure pull system, you want a fairly short cycle time to manufacture and produce the goods. You need customization. That has to be something that your customers want and that you're set up to provide to them, because that's one of the reasons for the pull, is you don't make it ahead of time because you want to make it to the customer's demand. You want flexibility in the supply chain, short lead times, because customers don't want to wait a long time when they're ordering something custom, unless it's very high end, like a Ferrari or something, a very expensive car. And you want to have backlog built into your system and make sure that backlog is acceptable to your customers. Another example I use when I teach students at university and talk about push-pull is a bakery. So a bakery makes cakes and cookies and donuts, and they make them every day. If you have a pretty broad bakery, every day you go in there and you can buy cookies, chocolate chip, sugar cookies, oatmeal cookies, peanut butter cookies, whatever their offering is. But they make more than cookies. They're going to have sheet cakes. They're going to have brownies. They might have croissants or bread or anything like that. But they have a variety of things that they make. All the things that they put in those cases for you to choose, those are the push system. So if you come in and you need a dozen cookies, you may say, okay, give me 3 oatmeal and 2 chocolate chip and this many sugar cookies and get your dozen cookies. Or you may say, I want a dozen chocolate chip. But they are pushing those because they're making those in advance, expecting customers to walk in and buy whatever is available, which is a good thing. But they also make things typically that are pull systems. And if you want, for example, a nice bakery will make wedding cakes. They don't make wedding cakes in anticipation of somebody coming in and saying, oh, I need a wedding cake. They make chocolate cakes, they make yellow cakes, they make white cakes, and then they may have those iced or uniced, either available immediately or maybe in the back. And you can come in and say, hey, I'd like a chocolate cake with white icing, and I'd like it to say, happy birthday, Mom. So if they don't have that maybe in stock, then you might have to get a yellow cake with white icing, or you might have to do a different combination. If you want that for sure, then you want to call ahead and say, I need next Tuesday a chocolate cake with chocolate icing, and I'd like that to say, Happy Birthday, Joe. So you can customize those things from the pull system. But a wedding cake is a different kind of scenario because it isn't the same chocolate, vanilla, white cake that's typically there. The wedding cake is a special cake. It's special decorations. It may have special fillings on it, different tiers. So some are 2 or 3 tiers tall, some are 8 tiers, and some are huge, and some are 6 or 12 inches and small. So there's so much customization in that. That's truly a pull system. They don't make those until you order those. They may make cakes and have them staged, and they may make cakes, bake cakes, and have them iced. So you have 3 flavors of cake. Sometimes they have them that they can put the different fillings in. Sometimes they go ahead and put chocolate with raspberry filling because they find that that's a very popular combination. And you can go in and you can buy what's in the case, or you can have it customized, but have something written on the top. If they have a chocolate cake with white icing and you want a chocolate cake with chocolate icing, they can't remove the icing and put the other one on, but they can customize it for you. So these scenarios take us to more of the hybrid model. So the hybrid is something that's easily customizable. So the cake with the frosting on it, whether it's yellow cake with chocolate frosting or whatever, that's customizable. That is a fairly common sale that this bakery makes. And so they're going to make those. Or if they have a wide variety, they may make the cakes and they may not ice them until they have an order, until you come in and order that. But that means you have to be willing to wait while they do that. So you have to understand your customers' needs and wants. For other kinds of customization, it may be putting a label on, or it may be changing the packaging. It may be putting the cover on the phone that you want, the right color phone. But you keep things in this vanilla flavor, and then you can customize it. So with a hybrid model, you have some of that you operate on a push system, and then at some point in the supply chain, it actually changes to a pull system. Excuse me. For example, in the wedding cake scenario, what goes into a wedding cake? It's sugar, it's milk, it's flour, oil, all of the things that a bakery typically has. So they have what they need to make that. They just don't start that process until they actually have an order, because it doesn't make sense for them to do that. They shouldn't, they don't want to waste their materials and their time making things that there's no one buying. So they wait until they have that order. They have all of the raw materials there, and they make sure, in the case of a cake, it's very fresh. So they make sure that they can make that, but they do need warning to do that. They also have cakes that are ready to ice. So they have cakes that are ready to ice, or maybe they're iced and they're just ready to decorate. So if you don't need the decoration, you can go in and buy it, and then that's a part of that push model. But if you do want it to say happy anniversary or happy birthday, Susie, then you can have that done right there. It's very quick. It's very easy. If you want a fancy kind of image on the cake, or something that's going to be very elaborate, then you need to give them some time to do that. And most customers understand. I can go in and order a cake and have writing on it, and maybe some roses put on it, and some sprinkles, or some things like that are very quick. But if I want that to be an elaborate circus design with clowns and this and that and the other, I'm going to have to order that in advance, not weeks in advance, but at least a couple of days in advance. And the bakery will tell you what the lead time is for that. So this hybrid system says that you have either some or all of the raw materials, and that's where you set up to do a push system. And then you actually put that together when you get that signal. So if I said I might want a cake with a clown theme, if the bakery has sold that before, they may have those kinds of things that they can put on top and not have to go order those themselves, or they may have to, depending on what that is. If you go to a nice bakery, they have books and they will show you things they've done before. If they've done it before, they can do it again. If you watch some of the TV shows where they have things very custom, then it takes longer to do that and they need some more time to set up and create different aspects of that. But if you just want white roses or pink roses on the cake, they can do that very quickly with not too much notice. So they have the raw materials. That's the push system. And then the customization comes when they actually get the order and they either finish that product or they start that product from scratch. Another good example of that is a furniture manufacturer. There's a lot of furniture that you can buy, like a dining table. You can buy it in different configurations, different sizes for different types of families. You can buy one that seats 4, one that seats 12, different numbers of leaves in there, but you can also buy it in different stains. So factory manufacturers make product and then they don't stain it or paint it until they have orders or a set of orders or until they have a better forecast. So they may hold WIP inventory in terms of a table or maybe a tabletop and table legs that's ready to be stained and assembled, but they don't actually do that until they have an order for that. Or they put those together and wait until they have orders for so many of those, unless they're a custom shop, and then they will do those one at a time, which either way makes that this hybrid model because they know they're going to sell dining tables in these styles. They have the styles designed and they know the manufacturing processes to carve the wood or to make the wood into the right shape, but then they don't actually finish it until they know what the customer is going to want. So it's that combination of both. And the inventory, if you follow my examples here, the inventory is going to change depending on what your manufacturing strategy is. Are you a push manufacturer? Are you a pull, or are you a hybrid? If you're a hybrid, you're going to do one set of things to make sure you've got raw materials and things set up, but you're not going to have much finished goods. If you're a push system, you might have a lot more finished goods, either that or in transit waiting to get to the ultimate customer. And then if you're a pure pull system, you're going to have your inventory, maybe not much inventory at all. You may wait to order even the basics until you get orders, or you may have a few little things in stock ready to go ahead and build your work in process and then delivery. So that's going to affect the balance of your inventory. It's going to affect your strategies for inventory. So those are very important. The other thing is, once you decide how much inventory you're going to have in what form, then you have to make sure that you keep your inventory accurate. This is very, very important to make sure that you have inventory balances that you can trust and rely on. So the accuracy is going to be really key. Using the ABC classification is a very smart way to do this. If you're not familiar with the ABC classification, A parts are typically your highest dollar and maybe the highest value criticality to you, maybe not the highest dollar, but maybe there are things like that are glass or that need special handling or need refrigerating or need anything that's special that's going to make that critical to your business. C parts are the other end of the spectrum. They're the things that are easy to get, not long lead times. A parts may have long lead times as well. C parts are typically short lead time, short dollar item, and don't take up much space in your warehouse. Your A parts, again, may be one of the exceptions to the dollar rule, is that the A parts take up a lot of space. So they may be all of that. They may take up a lot of space. They may be expensive. They may be very critical to your business. So in every way you look at it, that's an A part. C parts, I always talk about that as hardware, nuts and bolts and screws, things that are easy to get, catalog parts, things that are easy to order, not expensive, don't take up a lot of room, and don't have a big issue around spillage and inventory inaccuracies. You don't want to be wildly off, but if you buy a box of screws that says 500 on it and it spills or you lose a couple, you shouldn't be in angst over losing 2 or 3 screws out of the box of even 100. you should be having enough of those and enough of those available that you're not counting every little last washer or screw or nut or bolt, versus something that's an A inventory, which is important. And the ABC classification pretty much goes with the Pareto principle. The A parts should be about 15 to 20%, no more than that, maybe even as low as 10% of the number of parts that you're managing in the inventory. But they're going to be a very high percentage of the dollars, typically 70% or more. The C parts are the other end of the spectrum. They're going to be 70% of the number of parts that you're managing. Maybe not quite 80%, but they follow that Pareto rule pretty closely. But they're going to be, so most of the numbers of parts, but a very small amount, sometimes even 5% or less of your total value of your inventory. And then the B parts are the in-between. Maybe they have kind of medium lead times. Maybe they come from an area that is not reliable to ship into or to ship out of. Maybe they have a little bit of value, but not as much as an A part. I always say, if you look at your phone, whether it's an iPhone, I use iPhones as examples all the time. Your A parts are going to be things like your camera. The screen in there is very important. And the motherboard is probably going to be a very important part of that. Your C parts are going to be the screws that put the cover on, maybe some of the solder that you have to do to put parts on, maybe a connector in between things. And then your B parts are going to be things like maybe the speaker, if you have a microphone, that might be a B part. If they're special and they're very expensive, then they can be elevated to A parts. But you're going to have a few of those B parts. If you have buttons, if you have an older phone like I do that still has buttons, those are going to be in that C range, and they're not going to be worth that much. The cover of the phone that puts the color on there that distinguishes that's not going to be so much either. So you have A, B, and C parts, and that dictates how you manage the inventory. With, again, it's security, insurance, all of that. How often and how many cycle counts you're required to do. With A parts, you want to do cycle counts much more frequently, but you have a smaller pool of parts. So maybe a good rule of thumb is over the course of a quarter, 13 weeks, that you're counting everything in that item. If you have 50 items and you're counting some portion of them every week, then 50 divided by 30, 50 parts divided by 13 weeks, it's going to be 2 or 3 parts a week, maybe 4 parts a week. And even if you're counting 5 or 6 parts a week, it's not a lot of parts. The C parts are the opposite. You will go the whole year and not count all of the C parts. And so those become more important when you do your physical inventory. And then the B parts, you count a few of those. And typically cycle counts are done every week for some number of each of these parts, depending on how much total inventory you have. And then you do a physical inventory once a year, which really trues everything up. And the cycle counts are really there to make sure that people are following processes and that you can trust the information in your system because people are following the processes and managing that. So you true it up maybe once a year with the physical inventory, and then you do the cycle counts, not to find the defects and not to find the gotchas, but to really validate that your processes are adequate and they're being followed. And so you're maintaining accurate inventory balances. You want to look at cash versus inventory. Again, I told you on the balance sheet, it's short-term assets, which is the biggest one there is inventory, and cash. So those two are there. When you have to trade that off, you need to decide which one is more important in which form. It doesn't mean you have to have all the inventory, but it may mean that you're going to have a little additional inventory in areas where you have volatility, longer lead times. It may mean that you can scrimp on inventory when you have things that you have suppliers that are closer that can deliver more quickly. And maybe you have suppliers that are holding inventory for you as well. And that might be a good thing to use so that you can reduce the inventory you actually have on hand. And then you have to look at how much scrap, how much rework, and how much obsolete inventory you're having to manage over time. The process flows are very important. How is it flowing? How is the handling? Because you don't want to handle that inventory too often. That's why just in time is such a great tool, because it doesn't have to go into inventory and then get issued to the floor. It often usually gets issued immediately to the floor and then consumed from there. So how does that work for your company? Every company has to decide on their own. There are different costs and penalties associated with inventory. If you don't have accurate balances, you can have a real problem. You can have incomplete lots. So you think you're going to make 100, but you ran out of parts, so you can only make 98. You might have your factory shut down because your production is going to get disrupted. You ran out of parts, you can't issue those. And if you have too much scrap, you're adjusting that all the time. So you're buying 100 or 100, you're trying to make 100, you might have to buy 110 because you're losing 10 out of every 100 that you buy to scrap for some reason. So you want to look at that. Shortages drive overtime. That doesn't sound right? If I don't have parts, how can I work overtime? If you don't have parts, you might work overtime the next week or the next 2 weeks trying to make up for the production that was scheduled that you couldn't do because you didn't have parts. You might have to expedite shipments either inbound from your suppliers or outbound to your customers. Expedited orders always cost more than planned, and that takes away from your profit. If you don't have the inventory and you have shortages, you might just have lost sales. You might just have that opportunity cost where the customers are ready to buy, but you didn't have any, so they went somewhere else. And then you can overrun your cost modeling significantly if you can't manage your shortages. And then if you have too much inventory, you end up typically with more scrap and rework because you're changing the models or you're having to update that. Sometimes the scrap is increased just because it's sitting around a long time and the risk of damage is higher. If you have too much inventory and you can't do anything with it, then you might have to furlough people. You might have to encourage them or force them to take vacations, and you're not really utilizing the time that you have because you have too much material, but not enough demand for that. It ties up your cash and it ties up your space. So companies have to be on the lookout to not have too much inventory. I often say that we are the Goldilocks in a company, that supply chain is always trying to do that. Not too much, not too little, not too hot, not too cold. We want everything just right. And it's very difficult to do. So you want to manage your variability of demand. Min-max systems are a good thing to do. If you've got short lead times, you say, we're going to buy up to this much. And then when it gets down to the minimum level, that says we're going to buy more. If you can replenish quickly, therefore you have a shorter lead time, that can be a good thing to do. And sometimes that works very well with situations where you have a minimum buy from your supplier. You have to buy 100 of them and you set your minimum quantity at 10. So when it gets down to 10, you buy another 100. So the max you're going to have in inventory at any time is going to be about 110. If you wait till it's down to 10 to order, that's what you're going to have. So you can calculate that pretty readily from the lead time and your demand. Safety stock is that just in case inventory, in case something goes wrong or in case you've got some volatility that you didn't expect. And safety stock, there's calculations for that that you can find in textbooks. But in my experience, companies say, let's keep a week's inventory. This is our forecast. We're using 100 a week. Let's keep an extra week or maybe 2 weeks of inventory that we're going to keep on hand. So we just add that in there. We kind of ignore it. When we look at the inventory balance to reorder, we don't include that. We just say we're going to raise our reorder point and we're going to keep that 200 pieces, that 2 weeks of inventory. If I use it, then that's okay. And I'll just replenish it. But what companies don't often do or don't do often enough is to go back and look at those balances and say, oh, we really haven't used that inventory. So we can reduce that safety stock level. And that's a good opportunity if you're not really ever eating into that just in case inventory. You may not want to get rid of it, but you may be able to reduce it. And that saves money too. Kanbans are visual cues. They're usually cards that say, okay, when you get to this place, you order more. It's good. It's used in WIP. It's used in just-in-time inventory on the floor. So this tells you when to order or when to seek more out of the inventory to the floor. And then you can look at vendor managed inventory, 3, 4, 5 PLs, or you can do all kinds of different things. So there's lots of ways to manage variability in your demand. You just have to pick what works best for your company. There's a couple other inventory practices that I want to go over really quickly. Fixed order intervals means that you order every week. Restaurants do this. Grocery stores do this. Some companies do this. They order every week or maybe every month. In some companies I've worked for, office supplies is this way, that we order office supplies once a month. So if you need something, you need to tell the order manager of that. And then once a month, they get those things in. That's a fixed order interval. A fixed order quantity says we're going to order the same amount every time. So we don't know exactly when we're going to order it, but we're going to order that same amount. The example I use for that is like a gasoline station. So they have these big tanks and they need these big trucks to come out and fill those tanks. So when they order it, they always get a tank load. They don't order just a half a tank or a quarter of a tank to top it off like we might do with our gasoline. When they order it, that big tanker comes out, they want to make sure that they are maximizing the transportation of that and the cost of that. And so you're ordering the same amount every time. Another thing is that it comes in like 55-gallon drums. So when you order it, you order a 55-gallon drum. You might not need it for 2 weeks, and then you might not need it for 2 months, but you're going to order the same amount every time. We've talked about last time in lifetime purchases. This is a quantity that's open, but it's looking at what you need for your particular business, for whatever product lifespan that you have, and what your ability to accept changes to that is. Blanket orders are a tool that companies use a lot. They place a single purchase order with maybe a not to exceed or an expiration date of like a year out. And then as they need product, they issue another line item. They just create the other line item in the system to actually order what they need for that particular part. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Blanket orders can be even covering utility bills. You know you're going to pay utility bills every month, but you don't know what the exact number is going to be. So you wait till you get your bill, you create the line item, and you pay it. What we need to know is supply chain situations are all over the place. Every company is unique, but companies can spend up to 70% and sometimes more on direct costs on material. So it can be the biggest expense that a company has is to buy and manage inventory in terms of supporting your production. The pandemic has increased lead times all over the place. At one point, they were about 2.5 times what they were pre-pandemic. Some have settled down, some have not, depending on the goods you're buying. Small businesses were heavily impacted by COVID, but some large businesses were too for some industries and some types of goods. The Asian manufacturers are still kind of crazy with certain things going on. There's trade uncertainty with China. For a while now, China has not been the lowest cost manufacturer or manufacturing site. Companies have gone to Bangladesh, to Vietnam, to other places in Asia, trying to get cheaper labor still than from China. So there's a lot of different scenarios going on. Companies are transferring from one supplier to another, and that involves a lot of project management, a lot of resources. So the supply chains can be long, complex. We've got a lot of uncertainty. This VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So we all have to live in that. But what I know for sure is there's a better way to manage this. Complex supply chains require oversight and they require relationships. Risk is everywhere in the supply chain. So you need to know your supplier's strengths and weaknesses, know your company's strategy, and know the dependencies you have on your various suppliers for the different parts. Relationships really matter, and they can help you get through long-term and short-term inventory changes, and they can help you get what you need, and they can help you dispose of what you don't need, or to push back on some of the things that you forecast but don't need any longer. Lead times are more volatile than ever, and that's not going away for a while. So businesses are challenged to meet customer demands. You need to understand your customer needs and wants, your business strategies and your business needs and wants, the different kinds of inventories that you need, where they are, what form, what kind of quantities you need to hold those in. Look for some innovative ways to hold inventory, like having your suppliers hold inventory, or having your suppliers buy long lead material to shorten your lead time from them, so that they're holding some inventory and you might have some liability, but it's not like buying the whole part, or having everything available more quickly. Look at these processes and eliminate the opportunity to leave things to chance. Make sure you're doing things deliberately and overseeing your inventory. Sorry, that's not right. Next week, or next time we meet in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about blockchain technology. In July, we're going to talk about supply chain productivity and lean supply chains. And after that, I haven't really decided. So if you have suggestions or ideas, please contact me. I'm open to changing the topics. Right now, these 3 are locked in, but after that, anything's fair game. If you're interested in talking about inventory or any other supply chain topic, you can get a free 30-minute call with me at callwithjane.com. That will take you to my calendar, and you can pick a time and we can set that up and talk about anything supply chain, talk about how Purple Link can help your company meet some of your goals this year. We're setting up an online workshop for CPSM Exam 3 that's going to start in September. If you'd like to get a CPSM certification, contact me. These classes are online, they're easy, and I have a very high rate of people passing these exams. So it's important to me that people that take these courses from me pass. And so I have a process now that's working pretty well. And we're going to announce some more workshops this summer. So I want to leave you. Usually I leave you with one thing, but today I really felt both of these were kind of hitting me. So the first one is from Taiichi Ono, who is one of the founders of the Toyota production system. And he says, the more inventory a company has, the less likely they will have what they need. And I've seen that in companies, and you've probably seen that too. They have a lot of inventory, but they still don't have the one part or the one critical item that they need in order to go make that production. And then Albert Einstein, who's always a favorite of mine, says a bartender is just a pharmacist with limited inventory. But we all know that there are some bartenders who can come up with some pretty creative things with limited inventory. So inventory can be a limitation, but it can also be a source of creativity. And if you add a little creativity to how you manage your inventory, I have a feeling you're going to come up with just some better ideas and some better practices than you're using today. So that's what I have for you today. I'm going to stop the recording.